The story you know says the giant woke. It says a Sunday morning of smoke and surprise hardened American will, like tempered steel. And from that moment, the Pacific shifted on command. It says the punch that landed on Pearl Harbor only sharpened the counterpunch, that the ships rose from the mud and the factories screamed to life, and history snapped back toward inevitability. Not in this world, not in the one we're about to step into together. It is morning over Oahu, December 7th, 1941, and the harbor breathes fire. Just before 8, you hear sirens climbing into the sky and the flat crack of bombs stepping across the water like thrown stones. You smell fuel before you see flame. The air tastes metallic, a tang that sticks to your tongue. A plume rises where a battleship's heart detonates, Arizona's magazine rupturing. And the sound is not a boom, but a tearing, as if the island itself has been unzipped. Oil boils on the surface and paints the waves with black mirrors. The first silhouettes are impossibly graceful. A6M Zero, fighters with pale bellies and rising suns on their wings. D-3A dive bombers, Vals, knifing down with gull wings splayed, and B-5N torpedo planes, Kates, tracing level paths just above the water like skaters. They come from 6 flat tops strung across the North Pacific, Akagi and Kaga, Soryu and Hiryu, Shokaku and Zuikaku, decks fresh scrubbed and bristling, a concentration of carrier power the world has never seen gathered in one fist. More than 350 aircraft go out in 2 waves. More than 2,400 Americans will be dead by nightfall. We know these numbers. We've seen them in textbooks and memorial plaques, and in the way older voices drop a register when they say the date. In the familiar telling, a blank space saves America. The carriers aren't home, they live. The above-ground fuel tanks that feed the fleet stand unburnt on their steel stilts. They endure. The dry docks and machine shops at the Navy Yard bear scars, but keep their skeleton. Those gaps in the strike become the hinge of the war. Carriers Enterprise and Lexington return to sea. Saratoga joins them, and the counterblow begins its long wind-up. We know that map. We've walked those arrows with our fingers, but tilt the morning a few degrees and watch how everything changes. A weather system that looks like nothing on a chart turns into fate. A refueling delay that would have been anecdote becomes a catastrophe. Enterprise and Lexington, instead of catching clean air offshore, find themselves inside the bowl of pearl when the first wave breaks. Saratoga, her boilers hot, her air group still tied down, arrives before dawn from the mainland. For an hour they are what no carrier can afford to be, still, obvious, and trapped. At sea, a flat deck is a predator's mask, hard to find, hard to hit. At anchor, it is a target painted with rectangles. Torpedoes run true in shallow water, wooden tail fins fitted to keep them from burying in mud. Bombs crawl down the sky like black beads on wire. The first explosions are gut punches, low and heavy, and then the light decks catch and the fire leaps. When the smoke pulls away, those great wooden runways are not runways anymore, but charred bridges leading nowhere. The island's heartbeat stutters. The counterpunch, the one that should have burst from these decks within days, is gone before it is drawn back. And then the attack makes a second, colder choice. The squadrons that in our reality fanned out toward hangars and scattered targets bank instead toward the oil farms and the hard backbone of repair. You can see it from the hillside. Tall white tanks line like sentries. Millions of barrels of fuel that move the ships, feed the generators, keep the training flights from collapsing. One after another, they erupt. Black pillars rise and claw at the trade winds. Fire crawls. The heat slaps your face at a distance you would have called safe. Dry docks buckle and slump under shock. Cranes twist as if made of licorice. Rail spurs warp. The sheds where men would have turned wrecks back into warships are themselves wrecked. The island keeps its courage. It loses its capacity. We could stop right here and still feel the reach into your own life. You now, holding a phone built from parts that have crossed an ocean under guard of a navy that, in our usual telling, learns to project power on a schedule. You, sitting under a light stoked by global supply chains that presume protected sea lanes. The movies you grew up with, the ones that draw a line from disaster to redemption in 2 hours and a swelling score. The old maps in classrooms, with arrows thick as tree roots pointing west from San Diego and Seattle. Pearl Harbor woke the giant, you were told. The giant stood up. What happens to the world you live in if the giant wakes to find its legs broken and its pantry burning? We don't need to invent monsters to make this plausible. The facts are enough. The date is fixed. December 7th, 1941, a Sunday that started like any other. The names are real. Arizona, Oklahoma, West Virginia rolled over, Tennessee and Maryland gouged, Nevada trying to run for the channel, under her own steam and bleeding as she goes. The planes are real, Zeros with cannons in the wings, Vals that scream when they dive because air fingers the slats. Kates slinging Type 91 torpedoes redesigned with wooden attachments so they won't bury themselves in mud. The task force is real. Kido Butai, the mobile force. 6 carriers and escorts sweeping down in gray weather to a rendezvous with a harbor that looks asleep. The near misses are real too. Enterprise was delayed by weather returning to Oahu that week. A slightly different wind, and she is under those clouds an hour earlier. Japanese planners debated whether to go after the tanks and the repair yards. In this path, the debate breaks the other way. Nothing supernatural, just 2 nudges, and then the ripples. You can feel those ripples with your hands if you imagine yourself on the piers. There is a stink of oil that sticks to your clothes. There is grit between your teeth that may be powder or ash. You watch sailors forming bucket lines with their bare hands because pumps have failed and hoses are cut, and somewhere, a chief is cursing oxygen as if he could take it personally. Men pull men out of the water with fingers that will not forget the texture of soaked wool. Someone's voice is too loud because their hearing is still ringing. Above all other sounds, there is a new hiss. Not steam from ruptured pipes, but air across charred beams where a runway should be. A carrier without a flight deck is an orphan. A port without fuel is an exhibit. An island without repair is a place where hope takes the long way around. Now, draw a line from this heat into your own kitchen and office and childhood. The plastic fork in your drawer took a path across water. The medicine in your cabinet did too. The pop songs in your headphones were recorded in studios fed by equipment that rode ships from places that may as well be myths until you trace the invoice. The politics you scroll past after dinner, the ones that talk about projection and credibility and alliances, all of them quietly assume that steel moves safely under a flag through blue. In our ordinary history, the United States takes 6 months to find balance and a year to begin moving across the map with confidence. In this history, that schedule turns viscous. Time becomes the enemy. Distance becomes taller. Routine surprise, the kind you get from a sudden storm or a machine that won't start, starts to matter more than strategy. We are not counting wrecks for the morbid thrill. We are measuring lives. You can see a mother in Wichita, with a circle penciled on a calendar she will later tear out. You can see a machinist in San Diego tightening a bolt and wondering which ship will carry his work if the slips at Pearl stay embalmed in scaffolds. You can see a boy in Honolulu gripping a chain-link fence while smoke writes his childhood across the sky in a language he can't read yet. It is tempting to say, America adapts, and be done with it. The United States is large, rich in raw materials, and famously stubborn. It has Detroit and Pittsburgh and a Mississippi that can carry more ore than a poet can count. Those things will still be true tomorrow morning. But the machines that turn ore into ships do not sail themselves to where they are needed. The pilots who will one day dogfight over empty atolls do not learn on broken runways. The paper plans and filing cabinets do not float. In our customary timeline, the absence of American carriers on that morning becomes a blessing. Their survival lets the Navy think about the war in terms of today and next month, not today and 2 years from now. In the story we're telling, that blessing is withdrawn. Enterprise, Lexington, and Saratoga become scars instead of fists. The island's tanks and repair backbone become smoke rather than promise. And the meaning of next month changes. Now, next month means rationing aviation gasoline by the hour, not the day. It means moving aircraft production schedules like chess pieces without a board. It means ships steaming long arcs to avoid a harbor that cannot fix them when they break. It means training cut short because the sky has to be saved for patrols. It means 100 small decisions that put safety ahead of speed. and speed ahead of audacity, until audacity itself is an endangered thing. You, listening now, know the comfort of inevitability. It helps you sleep. The world was messy, and then it healed. The good guys took their breath, and then took their turn. You also know the itch that comes when inevitability doesn't quite fit in your hands. Maybe that's why you're here. Because you want to understand how thin the line is between we will and we would have. Because you have learned that the shape of your life is the shape of decisions made by people you'll never meet, about places you'll never stand. Because you suspect that the difference between a wound you can work through and a wound that works through you is sometimes a turn of the wind or a commander's second thought. So, let us set the terms clearly and promise not to cheat. In this timeline, two assumptions tip the world. First, the carriers at Pearl are caught and wrecked. Their flight decks burned and their hangars collapsed. Their crews scattered to hospital wards and prayer and stunned silence. Second, the oil farms and the hard bones of repair, the dry docks, the cranes, the shops, are not spared. They are pounded and burned and bent until weeks turns into months, and months becomes a word you say softly because it might be years. Everything else proceeds as reality allows. No infinite squadrons, no invincible ships, just consequences. The most ordinary magic. From here, cast your mind forward into the errands of a nation that has to fight with its hands behind its back. Think of the training pipeline for naval aviators that expects so many hours in the cockpit and gets half of them. Think of supply officers counting tins of hydraulic fluid with the care of jewelers. Think of convoy commanders planning routes with a ruler because fuel margins do not forgive detours. Think of the unexpected enemies, corrosion from salt in a ship idled too long in warm water, morale that rusts when there's too much waiting. Rumor, the oldest weapon in war, finding fertile air in uncertainty. You feel how the idea of power thins when the practicalities bloom. You might ask, does the industrial engine not make this worry trivial? In 1943, American factories will produce aircraft by the tens of thousands. By late 1942, the machine is already waking. There are numbers to be proud of. A Liberty ship assembled in a handful of days in a spectacle of sparks. A B-17 wheeled into a winter sun with paint still soft. The answer is that volume is a promise and logistics is the bill. You need both to eat. The Pacific is not a neighborhood. It is a continent made of water. Distances between islands are written in days, not miles, and in tanker loads, not gallons. A fleet without nearby repair is a caravan without a well. An air group without fuel is a chorus that mouths words. Capacity somewhere else is not capacity here, not yet. Now, take that abstract truth and make it human. A young woman in Oakland stitches a parachute and traces her finger along the curve with the concentration of a violinist because she has been told a life hangs in the seam. A boy in Nebraska, 15 but insisting he is 18, stands in a recruiting office framed by posters of ships that no longer exist. A foreman in Bremerton watches his crew file past a clipboard and thinks about how far a material can be pushed before it fatigues. Steel, yes, but also bone. We say home front and think of victory gardens and posters. We could also think of lunches eaten cold on a bench because the line didn't move. We could think of silence at dinner because the news said nothing new, and not saying anything feels safer. Power is not just a number in a ledger. It is the feeling in a room when the phone rings at a bad hour. If you're still with us, and you are, you might feel a tension behind your ribs that is not only dread, but curiosity. What breaks first? What bends? Which habit of mind does the most damage when it goes unexamined? In the ordinary story, the first months after Pearl are a study in American improvisation. Doolittle's raid as a telegram of intent, Midway as a reversal written in codebooks and courage. Guadalcanal as a crucible that teaches a navy how to live on a knife edge. In our story, the knife is closer to the throat. With the carriers maimed and the island's lungs scorched, the tempo of improvisation changes. Raids that would have announced presence become risks no sane admiral approves. Battles that would have been fought become rumors that never leave a conference table. Even victories feel partial because there is nowhere to bring the ships that win them. In the Pacific, winning is often the right to come back tomorrow. In this Pacific, coming back is the hard part. You and I live in the comfort of outcomes. We know who wins. We know when. That knowledge softens the edges of the choices that led there. But if we rearrange the morning at Pearl, even slightly, we rearrange every choice that follows. We invent nothing. We only remove a tool and strike a match in a different corner of the same room. And the room fills with a different smoke. Smarter people than us will argue that industry alone would have corrected the tilt, that geography and resources and stubbornness would have overridden the bad start. Perhaps. But the calendar matters. The first year matters. The way it feels to be a sailor who knows his ship cannot be fixed nearby matters. The way it feels to be a pilot who counts each hour of fuel like a rosary matters. The way it feels to be an ally, watching and wondering if the giant's hands can close around anything more than grief matters. If you want to keep walking these alternate corridors with us, to test how far plausibility can reach without snapping, and to see how the familiar map redraws itself under small pressure, subscribe, and come along. Not because we promise neat answers, but because asking better questions makes the world we actually live in clearer. We will carry those questions into the next hour of this story. We will measure time by logistics and courage, and we will watch the calendar become a battlefield. We will follow convoys that were supposed to leave on Wednesdays and now wait until Sundays because fuel allotments arrive like weather. We will watch shipyards that were supposed to be humming look quiet from the outside because their work is not sparks but paperwork. Requisitions for replacement cranes, surveys of warped rails, long math about whether a dry dock can hold a ship with a broken spine. We will stand on a destroyer's deck and feel the vibration of engines that should have been aligned in a proper yard by men with tools they trust, and we will know that somewhere inside the hull something is a little off, and that little off will cost a knot, and that knot can cost a day, and a day can cost lives. We will meet a young ordnance officer who should be training replacements and instead spends afternoons scrounging gaskets because the shipment that would have delivered them burned in a tank farm before it ever got assigned a crate. And the consequences will not stay in ledgers. They will show up in letters home. They will show up in how long you hold a hug. They will show up in the way radio announcers lower their voices when they read casualty lists that are not extraordinary enough to be news and not ordinary enough to ignore. The process of turning grief into power, the process Americans like to believe they are especially good at, will still happen. It will just happen with a limp. It will happen with long pauses. It will happen while the other side is still moving in straight lines. We'll set aside the comfort of aphorisms and deal in particulars. The morning is gone, the day is not. The sun is already angling west, and shadows from the cranes lie like broken ribs on the piers. Somewhere, a commander sits at a metal desk and circles a word in a report. Unserviceable. Somewhere else, a clerk stamps a date and does not realize he is dating a delay that will push a ship's departure into a month named for a season that hasn't arrived. We will follow those circles and stamps. We will watch what unserviceable does to men and plans when it repeats. We will do it slowly, with the patience the subject deserves, not because we admire disaster, but because understanding it is how you keep it from happening again. When you close your eyes tonight, try to hear the harbor after the noise. There's a quiet that feels like shame and a quiet that feels like resolve. This one is both. There's a wind that smells like old pennies and salt. There's a light that makes everything look smaller except the plumes of smoke that keep their arrogance even as they thin. Tomorrow, someone will chalk a schedule on a board. Tomorrow, someone will write to a family with words that have been written too many times. Tomorrow, someone will put on a hard hat and step onto a scaffold that sways because there are fewer bolts than there should be. Tomorrow, the world moves, but tonight, the world pauses, not for a moment of silence exactly, but for the intake of breath before the long exhale of consequence. And from that breath, we'll begin. We will let the first year unfold, not as a list, but as a life. And we will watch the way a burned fuel tank can cast a shadow across an ocean, and the way a charred deck can change the sound of a nation's heartbeat. We'll take the measure of what people can do when the obvious tools are gone, and all that's left are hands and will and time that can't be hurried. We'll keep the facts where they belong, in our pockets, ready to be felt whenever the story grows too neat. We'll keep the people where they belong, in front of the numbers, never behind them. The consequences are personal. The consequences are unavoidable.